All right, so we want to pick up in a part two on this little conversation with Microsoft Copilot about the word Torah in the Hebrew Tanakh, um, called by some the Old Testament, and like whether it means instruction, whether it means law, and it seems like the conclusion is that the word means instruction, that it's a flexible word that, depending on the context, um, that determines what the meaning of the word is. Um, so we just covered, leaving off in part one, we covered that Microsoft Copilot, doesn't consider the Book of Jubilees to fall within the classification of the Torah of Moses, um, and it bases that on the lack of mention of the Book of Jubilees in the Hebrew Tanakh as being part of the Torah of Moses. So um, basically, Copilot seems to have some difficulty grasping a not very documented scenario where maybe the Dead Sea Scrolls community would have considered the Book of Jubilees to be part of the Torah of Moses. But anyway, that was a little bit like pulling teeth, but we should continue since we're on page 25 here of this conversation. It says the Torah explicitly says that there is one law or one standard for both the native born and the foreigner in several key passages. So I had asked Copilot about this because there's something called the Ger movement, and I don't know if it's got any traction right now, but it kind of presents itself as an opposing viewpoint to the laws of Noah, or the laws of the B'nai Noach, the Noahide laws, which is what Orthodox Judaism says is incumbent upon non-Jews who do not convert to Judaism. But, the Gentiles, they're always using this divide and conquer strategy on the Jewish people and on Judaism. So on the one hand, they'll say, oh, well, Gentiles don't have to follow any of those laws. And then on the other hand, they'll try to push that Gentiles should be able to follow all of the laws. And by pushing both of these extremes, they seek to tear the truth in two, divide and conquer. So, whereas I personally find it very refreshing that Orthodox Judaism says, look, if converting to Judaism doesn't seem like a good fit for you, then as a non-Jew, then you only need to follow these Noahide laws, these laws incumbent upon the children of Noah. And and there's still quite a few laws there. Like I have a book called The Divine Code, which runs down all of the different laws, or at least it attempts to. I don't know if it's exhaustive in that respect, but it attempts to run down all of the different laws that are supposed to guide non-Jews. So, and the thing is, like, you get these people who are trying to say, oh, well, Gentiles are supposed to be allowed to observe all of the laws of the law of Moses, which is silly because even within the children of Israel, you have people within the children of Israel who are not obligated to fulfill laws that have nothing to do with them. Like a mere priest doesn't have to fulfill all of the laws incumbent upon the high priest of Israel. You know, it's a separate category. But like Gentiles, especially ex-Christians or current Christians, you know, they're looking for something more egalitarian, and they feel somehow offended if they aren't allowed to obey like every law, even if it has nothing to do with them. You know, that's, or at least they pretend to be offended and discriminated against by these things when it's pure silliness. Like the laws of menstruation, I don't have a monthly cycle or period, so, and you know, obviously, if my wife were to, or if I guess maybe anyway, if my wife were to have her cycle, then um, I guess there would be, you know, things that I would be prohibited against or have to do just by being married to her. But um, like the laws, like I don't have a cycle, so I wouldn't be observing those laws as if I had a cycle. Um, you know, there's a person who's a leper. If I don't have leprosy, then I don't have to follow all the same laws that the leper does. You know, it's just it's determined by a person's circumstances. Um, but these Gentiles will pretend that they're somehow being uh, like kept out or gate kept. Like gatekeeping is keeping them out of being able to observe all these different laws that have nothing to do with them. Anyway, so um, these verses outline the principle of equal justice and shared religious obligations for citizens and resident aliens. Oh. Exodus chapter 12, verse 49, the exact phrase is famously used regarding the Passover and religious participation. The same law applies both to the native-born and to the foreigner residing among you. So this is where, like, Gentiles will see the term Torah, and then they see that there's the same law for native-born and foreigner, and they conclude from this that the whole Torah is incumbent upon the foreigner. And then from that, they extend outwards to every Gentile in the world, which is kind of silly, but anyway, that's what they do. When the term Torah there is referring to a specific instruction, and it's saying that basically there's one standard in this instruction for both native-born and foreigner, but that's native-born and foreigner in the land of Israel. It's not native-born and foreigner in Tokyo, Japan. So Leviticus chapter 24, verse 22, this applies the concept to civil and criminal justice. You are to have the same law for the foreigner and the native-born. I am the Lord your God. Numbers chapter 15, verses 15 through 16. it highlights that communal ordinances apply equally to both. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. See, residing among you. So if you were to apply this to a Jewish community out in the diaspora, the foreigner would have to be residing within the Jewish community. I think not just geographically, but actually be some kind of functioning part of that Jewish community in order for this to apply to them, and I think that's even a stretch. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. So, and I'm sure that the term there is ger, Numbers 15:15. Yeah, one law and one manner shall be for you. Well, that's King James Version. Jeez. One law and one ordinance shall be for you and for the stranger who sojourns with you. And if we look at the interlinear, and for the alien, and then the word there is, let's see if I highlight that. Is it going to let me do it? Yeah. Yeah, it's Velager, with the ger being the important part. So yeah, but this is in the land. This is in the land of Israel. This isn't out in the diaspora somewhere. Numbers chapter 15, verse 29 deals with accidental sins. One and the same law applies to anyone who sins unintentionally, whether a native-born Israelite or a foreigner residing among them. Like, no two-tier justice system inside the land of Israel. Just because someone's a foreigner, that doesn't mean they get to get away with all kinds of Gentile mishigas in the land. The Torah is the same for these accidental sins. Now, in the Torah, at least in the oral Torah, I'm not sure if it's exactly the case in the written Torah. I would have to be instructed on where that is found, but I know that in the oral Torah it says that you've got to warn someone that they're either about to commit a sin or they're in the act of committing a sin before you bring some kind of compulsory punishment upon them for committing the sin. So if you've got this foreigner who's just waltzed into the land of Israel and decided he's going to sit down and stay overnight, or maybe the staying overnight turns into staying over month or staying over year, then someone's got to warn them about the sins that they're about to commit if it's going to result in some kind of serious punishment against them. Otherwise, that's just not fair. That's not a lawful society. That's a lawless society, a chaotic society. It'd be like I was about to, it'd be like an animal walking into someone else's land where there's no fence around the land, but then the landowner has put bear traps all over the land, like the cattle doesn't know that it's not supposed to be there, and it doesn't know that there are these bear traps all over the place that could get them harmed if they were to step on them. Comparing a commandment to a trap is not the best analogy, but I'm just trying to explain, and I could probably come up with, if I really strained my brain, come up with a better, more appropriate analogy, but that's what I'm going with because we've got to move on. Um, or we don't have to move on. Like, no one is pressuring us to move on. There's no deadline here, but if I turn this video into like a 10-part series, no one's going to watch it. So, uh, so, Copilot responds to a question I had, saying, no, a foreigner residing in the land of Israel was not obligated to keep all 613 commandments of the Torah. In classical biblical law and Jewish tradition, the oral Torah, the phrase one law refers strictly to civil and criminal equity. So I don't know about this dividing the different laws up into these classifications that I'm not even sure existed in Jewish law. We might be imposing Gentile classifications on Jewish law here. Refer strictly to civil and criminal equity, public order, and specific shared communal regulations. It does not mean identical religious obligations for non-Israelites. The distinction relies on how the Torah classifies different types of foreigners and their respective obligations. The two types of foreigners, the Ger Toshav, the resident alien. This refers to a foreigner who permanently settled in the land of Israel. They did not convert to Judaism. They were legally protected, allowed to access cities of refuge, and entitled to social welfare benefits like the poor tithes. The tithes for the poor, I guess. The Ger Tzedek, the righteous convert. This is a foreigner who chose to completely enter the covenant of Israel through circumcision and immersion. So this is a righteous convert. Only this individual was obligated to keep all 613 commandments. Legal obligations of a resident alien. A Ger Toshav was only required to follow basic universal laws and maintain the public sanctity of the land. So this is where this Ger movement, they try to use the term Ger, even though there's more than one type of Ger. They try to use it to say that all Ger are supposed to eventually, I guess, convert to Judaism, which is, I don't think that's anybody's intention, and I don't think anybody wants that. Legal, like, I don't recall any places where it says if a Ger Toshav has been in the land for such and such amount of time that that anybody is obligated to convert to Judaism after so much time. Legal obligations of a resident alien. A Ger Toshav was only required to follow basic universal laws and maintain the public sanctity of the land. The 7 Noahide laws. They were obligated to uphold fundamental human laws, including prohibitions against idolatry, murder, theft, blasphemy, sexual immorality, and eating flesh torn from a living animal, while establishing functional courts of justice. But establishing the functional courts of justice would not be in the land. That would be out of the land, because there would already be functioning courts of justice in the land established by the children of Israel. And these functioning courts of justice that are to be established by non-Jews would be run by non-Jews. Like, if Jews were sitting on the judge and jury of these functional courts of justice out in the diaspora, then the non-Jews, the Gentiles, wouldn't be fulfilling this positive commandment to establish courts of justice, because the Jews in the diaspora would have been the ones doing it. Public land laws. They were forbidden from violating the public sanctity of Israel. For instance, they could not publicly desecrate the Sabbath, worship idols, or commit offenses that would ritually defile the land. Yeah, and you see this sometimes now, where maybe tourists will go through like a Haredi neighborhood in Israel, desecrating the Sabbath, and the Haredis get pretty upset about that because the non-Jews are doing something they're not supposed to do. Worshipping idols. Non-Jews aren't supposed to worship idols in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel. But again, like, the Jews are not going to be enforcing that on non-Jews outside the land of Israel, because it's for the Gentiles to forsake those idols and turn to the worship of the biblical deity. But in the land of Israel, non-Jews are not supposed to be worshiping idols. And so this is a point where cynical anti-Semites in the diaspora, it's a sticking point, because they know that the ideal is that non-Jews are not supposed to be worshiping idols in the land of Israel, but they're also trying to show that, look, Israel isn't really a secular democracy. So they're kind of engaging in the sort of provocation that the Romans did before the Roman war against the Jews in the first century, where the Romans were trying to erect idols in the land of Israel, and that was incensing the Jewish people. And then the Romans would act like they were offended that the Jews wouldn't let them erect their idols in the land of Israel. And then they would evidently think that, oh, well, this gives us a license to make war with the Jews. So far from fulfilling their obligation to reject idolatry out in the diaspora, Gentiles also seek to erect idols in the land of Israel. So not only are they not fulfilling their obligation, they're also trying to keep Israel from fulfilling its obligation. And that's the thing. That's where, these Gentiles, they're such liars sometimes. And mind you, I myself am also a Gentile, but I'm like a Gentile who's had my eyes opened to what Gentiles are doing to the Jewish people, and have been for the last 2,000 years. But anyway, let's see. Direct distinctions in the Torah. The Torah itself explicitly shows that the citizen and the resident alien had different religious requirements. Dietary laws. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21, the Torah states, "You shall not eat anything that dies of itself. You may give it to the alien, the ger, who is within your gates," which shows, I don't know, that he may eat it. So then the ger may eat, like, I don't know if something that dies of itself is considered treif. Or I don't know if it's considered torn, like a roadkill. But Obviously the children of Israel don't consider that kosher, but it says you can give this non-kosher meat to a ger who lives within your gates, and he may eat it. So this flies right in the face of the idea that the ger is supposed to observe all the same commandments as the children of Israel. This proves the resident foreigner was not bound by Israel's kosher laws. Yeah, there it is. The Passover sacrifice in Exodus chapter 12, verses 43 through 48, the Torah notes that no uncircumcised foreigner may eat the Passover lamb or kid. It could be a kid. If a foreigner wished to participate, they had to be circumcised, effectively transitioning from a resident alien to a full convert. So when these Messianic congregations, they have their little Passover meals, of course, they're probably not eating a lamb for Passover. I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they get some mutton or a brisket or something. I don't know. And but you've got all these uncircumcised Christians at these Messianic Passovers, and they're partaking of the Passover even though they're not circumcised. Therefore, one law meant equality before the court. A native could not oppress a foreigner in business, nor could a foreigner commit a crime without facing the same judicial punishment as a native. It did not require foreigners to take on the unique ritual covenant given exclusively to the children of Israel. So, and then I ask another question. I don't know why all my questions are not here. Short answer, not exactly. Oh, okay. So this is where I think I asked Copilot whether the Greek word nomos, which is how Torah is translated in the Christian scriptures, and I would imagine in the Septuagint, whether the word nomos means instruction or whether it means law, and it answers not exactly, probably to the translation instruction. The Greek word nomos and the Hebrew word Torah overlap in translation, but they don't mean quite the same thing at a deeper level. What Torah means in Hebrew, Torah comes from a root meaning instruction, teaching, or guidance. It can include commands, mitzvot, legal rulings, narratives and wisdom, and the broader idea of divine instruction for living. Excuse me. So Torah is not just law. It's more like instruction rooted in a covenant relationship. What nomos means in Greek, nomos in Greek generally means law, regulation, statute, or custom, or even a broader norm, principle, or customary rule. It's primarily a legal or social concept closer to law as rules enforced by a system. Why they get treated as equivalents. When Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, the Septuagint, translators used nomos as the closest available word for Torah. That means Torah is translated to nomos in Greek texts, even though Greek didn't have a perfect equivalent. So this is an example of how a Gentile working with a translation of the Hebrew Tanakh, they they're just not getting it. You know, the very act of translation is insufficient. Now, they say of the 5 books of Moses, when it was translated to Greek, that all of these 70 scholars miraculously all agreed on the translation. I don't know. I wasn't there, but that's the traditional narrative about it. But I don't care what or how you translated every word of the Hebrew of the Torah into some other language, you're stripping away meaning in that translation, and it's not sufficient. If you really want to know what the Torah says or what the Hebrew Tanakh says, you need to start building up your vocabulary of Hebrew. I don't know what to tell you otherwise. But to pick up a translation, you being a Gentile who wasn't even raised in a Torah-observant Jewish community, and to think you know more about Torah than a Jewish person raised up in it, observing it every day, learning the language from the time they were a toddler, you're out of your gourd. You think, oh, the Holy Spirit that you think you have is going to teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance and make you a more of an expert on the Bible than the Jewish people, its interpretive community. But your Holy Spirit, so-called, isn't even able to get your denominations to agree on points like predestination. Okay? Whereas in the Jewish community, someone of the house of Shammai could intermarry with someone of the house of Hillel, even though they had disagreements on matters of the Tanakh, the Torah, halacha. And today, a Sephardic Jew can intermarry with an Ashkenazi Jew, or a Yemenite Jew, or an Ethiopian Jew, or a Kaifang Jew, etc., on down the line, because they're all Jews, and they all have the same halacha. Now, one sect may have a different minhag or tradition about this or that, but, when they marry, I'm sure that gets paved over to some extent. But in Christianity, where everybody supposedly has the Holy Spirit, nobody can agree with one another. And you've got sects that aren't even, that call themselves Christian, and by a Jewish person they would certainly be identified as Christian, but by other Christians they're not even considered Christian. It's a whorehouse. It's one big orgiastic whorehouse, Christianity. It's a whorehouse where the hookers are arguing with one another over which of them is going to get to service the next client. And yet they think that they're oh so inspired by the Holy Spirit and led into so much truth that they can presume to dictate what a passage in the prophets means to someone who can actually read it in its original language. Let's see. So the key difference, here's the simplest way to see it. Torah, in the core sense, is instruction or teaching, whereas nomos in the Greek is law or regulation. In tone, the Torah is relational or guiding, whereas nomos is legal and institutional. In scope, Torah is broad, teaching plus law plus narrative, whereas nomos is usually narrower, like a law or a norm. Some scholars summarize it like this: Torah equals instruction for life, nomos equals law or rule. So does nomos mean instruction like Torah? No, not inherently. Nomos by itself does not naturally mean instruction in the same rich sense, but in biblical Greek contexts it can refer to the Torah, which does include instruction. So linguistically, they're not the same word or concept. Translationally, they are often treated as equivalents, even though they're not. Bottom line, nomos is the Greek word used to translate Torah, but it leans more toward law, while Torah is wider and more relational, closer to divine instruction than just rules. So, and where are we now? We're just on page 30. So, I think I'll stop here. All right, page 30, yeah. And then we'll pick up on another part. But I think we've drawn a distinction between um, Torah in Hebrew and Nomos in Greek. And I think we're going to be investigating that even more. But and for the sake of Christians who have questions, we're going to be exploring some of the differences, the way Christians look at these things versus how the children of Israel look at these things.